Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to Smashing China to Pieces, the background between two wars, 1925, part 1 of 2 by Time Ghost History. If you want to check out my previous reactions to other Time Ghost History videos, remember the playlist card will be at the top. Just click on it and be able to access them. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
To understand what is going on in China in the 1920s and 1930s, we have to look at the beginning of the end of the Chinese Empire. So, in this episode, we will briefly leave our usual timeline and go back to the 19th century and the slow, painful collapse of what has arguably been the mightiest land in the world for 2,000 years. In our next episode, we will then get back to the interwar years. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately, humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. In 1800, the Qing dynasty rules over close to 300 million people, 1/3 of its population, in China, known also as the Middle Kingdom. And China is by far...
So China's population was roughly the size of the United States of America's population in current modern times. 300 million. They had 300 million around 1925. Wow.
Are the largest economy in the world. But while many other parts of the world are undergoing a process of rapid change, China has lost its technological and intellectual lead and is headed towards stagnation. The underlying reasons are many and complex, but in a great oversimplification, it can be said that the imperial system that has been set up to rule this huge land is too rigid, hierarchical, and bureaucratic to allow for the rapid societal changes driving and driven by the agrarian and industrial revolution in the West. As the Western powers take aggressive control of world trade, centuries-old Asian economic trade systems come under increasing threat. Using a combination of diplomacy, finances, arms, and drugs, European powers, especially Britain, start making inroads to gain control of China's valuable trade and resources. Now, the Qing dynasty has consolidated the empire and in many ways stabilized it, but they have also inadvertently weakened it. To uphold peace, they have deliberately turned away from militarism, largely banning armies from the interior, and focused their military power on border protection. While previous dynasties had depended on the cooperation of regional and tribal militia to defend and expand the empire, the Qing, especially under the Qianlong Emperor, restrict the ownership of modern firearms, effectively disarming any non-imperial forces. That weakness will soon prove fatal in an international conflict brought about by the illicit drug trade. In 1793, the Qianlong Emperor resists and blocks British efforts to open up trade inside China beyond the free trade port in Canton. But the British traders have already found a new way to make inroads: opium. By 1773, the British East India Company has literally started pumping the drug from India into China. They've not only established a lucrative business, but also created an epidemic of addiction. When the British diplomatic efforts to open China for trade fail, this becomes a deliberate method to weaken the Qing. Other parties quickly get in on this business, even the otherwise staunchly anti-colonial Americans, with, among others, the great-grandfather of President Franklin D. Roosevelt making a killing with drug smuggling to China.
Wow. Wow. And these are the supposed countries of the free world. Yeah.
By 1833, the Brits alone are offloading 5.1 million pounds of opium per year, creating as many as 12 million addicts and severely damaging the social and economic fabric of many Chinese cities. Now, conflict over drug smuggling might sound like a secondary problem in the greater game of international relations, but it is not. The immediate and secondary effects are crippling for China as a whole. See, it's like this. The massive amount of drugs flowing into the country is paid for in silver and other currency. The smugglers are foreigners and take this money out of the country. This creates a gigantic outflow of currency, literally draining the Chinese economy of its value, compounded by the already stagnant economy, the rapid growth in other parts of the world, and the effects of addiction on productivity. The drug trade will cut China's share of the global economy in half from 1820 to the 1860s. Already in the 1830s, the emperor vehemently protests to the British crown to no avail. In 1839,
I'm sure they don't even recognize his imperial authority over China. They don't. They just saw another nuisance, just talking and yapping around and with no significance to their authority as the British or any other colonial power. So yeah, they didn't care. They didn't at all.
he finally takes matters into his own hands and enters the British enclave in Canton, confiscating 20,283 chests of opium, more than...
Imagine an embassy, I think it was an embassy, right? Holding so much of this contraband, so much of these drugs. Imagine this happened in today's world, where you would find an embassy from a different country holding so many drugs and is becoming the nexus point of the selling and the distribution of drugs. I mean, that would create public outcry in any nation. And I'm sure the British are going to defend this and say that this is a business activity that is required.
and half the British annual opium exports to China at that point. Under pressure from the traders, the UK strikes back with force, and the First Opium War begins. Using their naval might, they come up with a tactic that will become known as gunboat diplomacy. Simply put, they just sail heavily armed Royal Naval vessels upriver to Chinese cities and shell them to smithereens one after another. In 1842, the Chinese sue for peace. The Treaty of Nanking will be the final nail in the coffin for China's role as the world's strongest economy or largest military power. The emperor now has to open China for trade, and besides Canton, 4 new treaty ports are opened under British control. One of them is Shanghai. On top of the treaty ports, the Chinese are forced to cede Hong Kong as a British colony and must pay a fortune in reparations, including the value of the drugs confiscated from the traders. This is the first of a series of treaties forced by the West on China, Japan, and Korea that will become known as the Unequal Treaties. These one-sided foreign agreements will awaken a popular movement towards modernity that will launch revolutions, topple the empire, and shatter China into cycles of civil wars and international conflicts, some that remain unresolved to this day in 2019.
Yeah, well, even, when you consider what's happening with Hong Kong in particular, how China is slowly regaining back that territory. They're not going to wait for a treaty that was signed. I don't know when was it signed, maybe 1999. I don't know when, with the British, withdrawing from Hong Kong, and they decided on a set time date when China would reclaim Hong Kong. They're doing it right now. They're not going to wait for more years for that to happen. They're doing it right now through legislative policies, through government institutions. They are literally putting in their authority on the peninsula of Hong Kong. And quite frankly, I understand, what's going on with the people there of Hong Kong. They want their freedoms. They want to have the same kind of lifestyle they've always had, the liberties and the constitutional protection of their human rights. I understand that. But I also understand where China's coming from, where this piece of land has always been theirs. It's just been taken over by a colonial empire during those times, where they didn't have the military power, or they didn't have the political power to beat back the British. So they're just reclaiming back what is officially and originally theirs. So yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult, but these messes were created so long ago, and we just have to deal with the consequences now. I mean, there are other nations across the world where these colonial powers have put their authority there, and then they rescinded it over time, and then it resulted in chaos, in destruction, in people fighting over land, fighting over resources, fighting over people, and it created a lot of pain and suffering, which is still affecting us even today in the present world with many of these countries. So what's happening here? Yeah. Colonial powers.
Already in 1850, China falls apart for the first time. Hong Xiuquan, a converted Christian millenarian, raises an army under the banner of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom and challenges the emperor for power. This is the beginning of the Taiping Rebellion that soon sees the whole country descend into civil war. It will be one of the bloodiest conflicts, possibly even the bloodiest, in human history. The exact number of dead is unclear, but it is at least 20 million and could be as many as 100 million who are killed or die by the famine and epidemics launched by the war during the 14 years of conflict.
So from a population of around 300 million, they've been cut to 200 million. Hey, that's crazy.
It fractures the country and is a rebirth of the old system of private, local, regional, factional, and imperial armies. France and Britain enter the conflict on the side of the Qing dynasty, and with their support, the Taiping are defeated in 1864. But pockets of civil war continue to break out as Taiping rebels rise up locally as late as 1895. One of the lasting effects of the rebellion is the rise of the warlords, with their own armies fighting for either side or among themselves in parallel conflicts. At the same time as the Taiping Rebellion, the Second Opium War takes place, and with this seemingly endless series of conflicts weakening the state, China soon becomes a land open for foreign land grabbing and political and financial domination. The French take Indochina and continue making...
And then we ask ourselves, why is China so antagonistic or very domineering in our modern era? Because they've learned from the best. They've learned from the best. They are just simply doing what has been done to them all these years back. They are just, trying to become that new colonial power of the world. Chinese money, Chinese infrastructure, Chinese policy making, and international weight. They're just doing what all the other nations have been doing throughout the years. So we shouldn't really be surprised, nor should we be angry, really, because it's just a mirror reflection of what's been going on across the world. So yeah, it is what it is.
Inroads in the Southwest during the Sino-French War. Using Chinese violence against missionaries as a pretext, German colonial enclaves are established by force. The Russian Empire promises help against the British and French, but also takes large chunks of northern China in exchange for their military support. Soon, China and Russia are at war for a time. All the while, Britain continues to force the expansion of their lease and free trade agreements. Various European powers and the United States increase their military presence and trade positions, bleeding the Chinese economy drier and drier. As if that's not enough, China's neighbor Japan also becomes a threat. Now, by the end of the 19th century, Japan has managed to defend itself against foreign domination and wiggled out of the grip of the unequal treaties. With the Meiji Restoration of 1868, the Japanese emperor again takes control of the country and launches major economic and social reform programs.
Yet again, the Emperor of Japan is also just copying what other empires across the world are doing. So it shouldn't be much of a surprise. We shouldn't really be so against what these empires are doing during that time. They're simply copying and pasting what's been going on. So yeah.
He focuses Japan on an aggressive defense and expansion policy and sets the country on a path to join the Industrial Revolution. Like the other expanding powers, Japan will look for resources for growth by subjugation of other powers and land grabbing. So now suddenly, Japan is on the rise as a new colonial power. Meiji sets his eyes on Korea, a tributary kingdom to the Qing Empire. In 1894, Japan invades Korea and over a period of 6 months, thoroughly defeats the Qing army in the First Sino-Japanese War. The peace dictated in the Treaty of Shimonoseki in April 1895 forces the Qing Empire to recognize the total independence of Korea and cede Taiwan and the Penghu Islands to Japan in perpetuity. Additionally, the Qing Empire pays a total of 13,600 tons of silver to Japan in war reparations and trophies, equivalent to about 510 million Japanese yen in 1895. And in 2019, it would be worth more than 150 billion US dollars, 6 times the annual revenue of Japan at the time. Last but not least, China is open to free trade for Japanese merchants. Japan gains access to the treaty ports and is allowed to open 4 additional Japanese trade enclaves on mainland China. So, now Japan joins the European colonial powers and the US in the great game of bleeding China's public coffers by trading into and from the country without taxation. In China, this is not well received. Who'd have guessed? And sets off a series of events that will soon topple the Qing dynasty. Dissatisfied over the loss of territory, independence, and financial might, parts of the military and the nascent warlords are about to rise up. At this point, the empire is ruled de facto by Empress Xiao Qingshan, the Empress Dowager Cixi. She had been the concubine of the Xianfeng Emperor until his death in 1861, when her 5-year-old son became emperor and she assumed regency. When that son died in 1875, she installed her nephew Zaitan as the Guangxu Emperor, but in practice, she is still in power. When he drives for wide-ranging reforms in response to the dire situation of the land in the 100 Days Reform Movement of 1898, they fall out over how to implement change, and she becomes convinced that he has tried to murder her. She places him under virtual house arrest in the Forbidden City. Cixi continues to juggle the complicated relations with the colonial powers on her land and is increasingly seen as an agent of foreign interest. In 1899, parts of the military have started to come together in a movement known in English as the Boxers. They demand an expulsion of foreign powers and the reform of the Qing dynasty. Although Cixi initially opposes the Boxers, she halts the modernizing reforms under pressure from them. In early 1900, she changes her position and sides with them to the outrage of the foreign powers. The Boxer uprising begins, and Chinese Christians, Western missionaries, and foreigners in general fall victims to violence and even massacres. Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Spain, Belgium, the Netherlands, the United States, Russia, and Japan now unite to put down the rebellion. In the summer, Cixi declares that she will expel the foreigners and declares war on all of them. The Russians use this as a pretext to invade Manchuria. The other powers move in with troops in the south and the center of the country. The rebellion is crushed, and the foreign powers now on Chinese soil start a series of violent reprisals, plundering, raping, and murdering their way through the regions that supported the Boxers. But this all has shown the foreigners that China is not going to be easy to subjugate by force without destroying her valuable trade resources. The 8-nation alliance offers Cixi a peace agreement that, more or less, sets the situation back to how it was before the rebellion. In the hope of a return to normalcy, Cixi accepts. But normalcy is relative, as for many people in the empire, in the words of historian Pamela Crossley, living conditions have now gone from desperate poverty to true misery. At least the Western powers have now decided that the best way to deal with the Middle Kingdom while avoiding any further escalation is through the ruling dynasty. And the Boxer Rebellion marks the end of their active involvement in China. Japan and the Russian Empire, however, have not decided to back down, which, as we shall see, will have long-ranging consequences. And internally, the country is more divided than ever, so the unrest continues. Still, Cixi manages to hold things together to some degree until 1908, when she dies, one day after the Guangxu emperor also succumbs to a mysterious and very sudden illness, aged just 37. There are immediate suspicions of foul play, and rumors abound that he has been poisoned so that he cannot succeed the aging Dowager Empress, but nothing is proven. In 2008, his remains will be exhumed and found to have 2,000 times the natural level of arsenic in his body. It is unclear who did it, though most indications hint that it was Cixi's final act in power. Though they are not the last rulers in the Qing dynasty, their parallel deaths effectively mark the final moments of Qing rule. You see,
the death nail.
Successor is just a 2-year and 10-month-old little boy called Pu Yi, who now becomes the Xuantong emperor.
And who becomes his regent now?
While he learns to walk and talk over the next 3 years, the simmering movements toward a more modern China, focused on progress and military might, will come together into a motley crew of activists espousing vastly different ideals, but with one goal in common: revolution. In our next episode, we will see how that revolutionary movement continues to fragment the shards of China, but how one man sets China on a path to reunification. A unification process that will also plunge the nation further into bloodshed that will last many decades and contribute to a series of wars that will eventually become World War II. Do not forget to subscribe, and please support us on Patreon to see ever more and ever more in-depth historical content. If you'd like to see an episode we did about an individual in China in the 18th and 19th centuries, you can click here for our World Dictionary episode about Qin Shi. By the end of the 19th century, I'm pretty sure that most Chinese did not feel that the glass was half full, but rather half empty. Well, Bambay. See you next time.
Okay guys, that was Smashing China to Pieces, the background between two wars, 1925, part 1 of 2 by Time Ghost History. Yes, despite the fact that China was having a weak government, a very disorganized government, a very backward-looking government, it was still their government, you know? It was still their territory, it was still their people, and these colonial powers took advantage of that. They just imposed themselves on the Chinese. Even after the protest of the legitimate government of China during that time, the emperors telling the British kingdom and their government that, please, your people are affecting our society with trading of these drugs and the opium. Please, we are requesting that they should stop this. They should leave our country alone and never return with such contraband. They never cared about that. The British didn't care about that. They would never care about that. China was no threat to them. So they would do whatever they wanted as long as the money continued to flow into their coffers. And the rest of Europe also saw that as Britain was continuing its further push in trying to create these trade networks on the Chinese mainland. They did the same. They didn't give a damn what the Chinese government was protesting against, you know. And the Americans, they also joined in. They also joined in and did the same stuff. And then, to add further insult to injury, the Japanese also did the same. Copy and paste. Everybody sees everything else that everyone else is doing, you know. Monkey see, monkey do. Everyone was doing the same thing. And it just became even worse for China as a nation. Its people were now, how should I say, like they were demoralized. They didn't know who to truly believe in, Infighting, civil wars began to crop up as more and more of these colonial powers came and further entrenched themselves in the Chinese society and on Chinese land. And then, in our modern era, we start asking ourselves, why is China becoming this superpower? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Because they have learned from their history. They are just simply doing what any other empire would do, because they've learned from those who came before on how to become a colonial power. They're just simply doing it. So we should not really be surprised. We should not be protesting as much as we are right now, because especially those colonial powers, because this is the very thing that your people did to the Chinese as well. So really, it's not something that I completely agree with or support, in terms of what China is doing in our modern era. But, it is what it is. It is what it is. And who knows, in the next 20 to 30 years, China might actually really be the superpower of the world again, like they were in 1925. They might replace the United States of America as the number one economy, as the number one military, as the number one political weight and clout throughout the world. And people are just going to have to accept that, just as much as the Chinese accepted this domination by colonial powers in the 1920s. So yeah, guys, nothing is forever. Nothing stays forever. It changes. Time changes everything. And yeah, I guess the Imperial China, China's time was running out. They were still killing each other with political assassinations and killing family members so that they don't attain power, they don't achieve what they wanted. And now we're reduced to a 2-month-old baby trying to walk and talk, while the rest of the empire is plotting another rebellion against not only the current status quo, but also against the monarchy, and probably going to wipe it out. Just like what was happening in Russia and in Germany as well. So yeah, very, very interesting. Guys, that's it for today. If you like the video, remember to give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I will see you next time. Okay? Bye.